Recently, I went to Valencia to talk to a writer friend of mine who's been creating some really interesting content about life in Spain, and more importantly, how life in a Spanish city compares to life in the US. Rocco Pendola has a degree in city planning. He's an excellent writer, and I was thrilled to be able to get a chance to talk with him in person in Valencia, the city that he now calls home. So Rocco could share his thoughts about Spanish cities, why he loves living in Spain. So enjoy the talk that I had with Rocco. I'm excited for you to hear what he has to say. I'm Shawn, and this is Days We Spent. We're going to get into his first year in Spain, some of his thoughts on Spanish cities, what's it actually like to live here, and any other questions that I can think of off the cuff to surprise him with. Let's get into it. Why don't you tell people who don't know who you are, what you do, kind of what your background is.
So I've been a freelance writer, writing primarily about personal finance for the better part of the last 20 years. Before that was working in talk radio. When I got out of talk radio, I happened to be living in San Francisco. I asked myself, why have I never lived in a city like this before? I love this life so much. So I moved there in 1999. After settling in for a couple of years, I decided to study urban planning. 4.5 years actually at San Francisco State, graduate school at UC Irvine, immersed in studying cities and city planning, did some research, published some papers, found my way into freelance writing, and I've been doing that ever since. When my wife and I decided to move to Spain.
When was that?
We've been here almost a year. And I think we made the decision to move to Spain in particular around 2 years before that. So we're talking roughly 3 years ago.
Because the timeline for a lot of people is interesting. Like the idea comes into your head, and then you kind of start to get serious about it, and then you take that first step.
Now, for my wife, who's originally from Puerto Rico, as a child, she had this dream of wanting to live in Spain. There's something about this country that has always drawn her to it. For me, it was the time that I spent studying urban planning. One thing I noticed in urban planning classes is that almost every professor had what I now call a case of European envy. We talk about the great cities of the United States, New York, San Francisco, Boston, Portland, Chicago. A lot of people talk about Vancouver, doing really interesting things from an urban planning perspective, but it was always stopping short of that ideal European city, right? In large part because of the dominance of the car and how so many things are built to accommodate cars, to accommodate parking. I always knew that there was at least a kernel of truth to that, right? We would never be able to have true traditional European cities in the United States because of the choices the country made in the 50s and 60s to push toward car culture and suburban development and so forth. The United States had a choice. For example, in the 50s, Goodyear Tire, Standard Oil, I think it was General Motors, colluded to essentially rip public transportation rail lines out of the ground in cities across the United States. Not just big cities, but places like Fresno. Like, the infrastructure was there. PBS has a great documentary everybody should watch. It's called Taken for a Ride. And it's one of the great tragedies in American history. And I think it really set the stage for car culture. In Europe, I believe they made the choice to respect the city and to keep cities lively and to keep cities the type of places where people want to live, as opposed to the idea of fleeing to suburbia. There's so many improvements happening around the continent and in the countries. Like Paris has completely transformed itself, pedestrianizing hundreds of blocks, building this incredible bicycle infrastructure, just flipping the script from cars to cycling in just a few short years. Like, if Paris can do it, anybody can. And it was the will of the people and the will of the voters that allowed it to happen. In Barcelona, they're retrofitting the entire city into super blocks. They're still making the decision to make improvements to pedestrianize places. And the opposite's happening in the US. The progress that has been made is being pulled back. There's money literally being taken that was given to cities to make pedestrian improvements and infrastructure improvements that are coming back because, quote unquote, the Department of Transportation in the US is because they're hostile to cars. The United States could have better cities. And the reason why they don't have better cities that look more like European cities is because they made the choice not to have them. I knew it would be better here, but I didn't realize that it's like I wasn't even overhyping anything. Maybe I was kind of underhyping it in my own mind.
What do you see as some of the fundamental differences between Valencia and a typical American city?
Number one is just the reality that infrastructure is built for the automobile in the United States. For a while, there was a lot of controversy over this 15-minute city concept, which is just basically good urban planning. I mean, this is something that is not a crazy idea. Everything you need is within a 15-minute walk, bike, or transit ride from where you live. The idea of convenience and less reliance on the car. They're just good planning principles that aren't built around the car. They're built really around giving people choice.
Valencia is about 1 million people.
Happens at the neighborhood level.
The neighborhood level is 15-minute city-ish.
I think New York's probably the best example you have in the United States. You can live in New York City, in Greenwich Village, or the Upper West Side, or wherever, right?
It's the best.
And did you have to leave your neighborhood?
No, that's the joke, is that you can go weeks and realize, like, oh, I haven't seen anything but the 3 blocks near my house.
You don't have to leave. And that's similar, I think, to a lot of European neighborhoods. Where I live in Valencia is a neighborhood called Rousseau. Rusafa. And the other big difference, again, it goes back to the car. It's a pretty cool thing. You see a ton of older people walking around on the streets all hours of the day in the plazas with young kids that can barely walk and middle-aged people like me. And families, everybody sharing the same public space. I have a 90-year-old father who can't drive anymore. He's effectively unable to do the things he used to do. He doesn't have that public social life that he used to have because he can't drive to it. So imagine him in Valencia or in Rome or in a city where you can walk out the door and you're in the plaza with other people having coffee and hanging out. It seems like such a romanticized idea, but it's not. It's like the reality. It's day-to-day life, and it's important. And I think the more that people romanticize it, the more they lose the real gravity in it and the real importance of like what this does for a place and what it does for people as they get older and what it does for people.
It's not about culture. It's about, in a lot of ways, infrastructure.
Right.
The way that a city is built entices someone who's in their 70s, 80s, or 90s to walk to the market.
Yeah, because they can do it, because it's possible, because they're not isolated because they can't drive or because they live in a place that's too far from other things.
A question that we get a lot is why here? Why this place? Maybe you can talk a little bit about Valencia, why you guys wanted to move to Valencia in the first place and how that is going.
For me personally, I've always wanted to live in what we called in urban planning classes a traditional city. So mixed use developments, very little reliance on the car, having everything you need within a short walk. Ever since moving to San Francisco, I could never have pictured myself living outside of a relatively large urban area. So it really came down to Madrid, Barcelona, and Valencia.
You didn't want to go too small.
No, we didn't want to go smaller than Valencia. Valencia is the third largest city in Spain, just under 1 million people. Obviously, Madrid is the biggest. Love it there. It's super cool, but it's also pretty cold and dry in the wintertime and super hot in the summertime, and you're not really close to water. My wife and I have both been close to water, well, for her for most of her life, and for me for the second part of my life, and we don't want to change that. Barcelona's great, super cool city, but there was something about the size of Valencia and specifically the way the neighborhood we live in, Rusafa, feels that made us feel like we could fit better and we can maybe integrate a little bit more easily the things that we want to do, the way we want to live.
How's that
Rusafa just feels like it's more conducive. It's been great. We made the right choice.
Yeah.
We knew exactly what we wanted. We had a near certain sense of what living here was going to be like in the day-to-day and a pretty good sense of the way places will function in the day-to-day. And it turned out that we were right. There really haven't been any surprises. Honestly, the only surprise is that it's better than I thought it was going to be.
The surprise is that it's working out.
The day-to-day life is exactly what we expected.
Were you ever considering other countries in Europe? Was France or Italy ever on the table for you? Or was that pretty quickly like, no, it's Spain?
We briefly considered Italy because I'm of Italian descent, so there might have been a pathway to citizenship. It would have been complicated, but ultimately we just felt like we'd fit better. My wife her first language is Spanish, she's fluent, and there was just something, this sense that I had that Spanish culture was going to be something that was going to be easy to live as a part of every day.
Okay.
As I get a little bit better at Spanish, I feel myself integrating and assimilating here more than I think I would have in Italy. Maybe I'm wrong. That's why we made the decision that we made.
That brings me to sort of one of the last things I want to talk about. You write a lot about the realities of life in Spain. What is something that you, or a handful of things that you really try to convey in your writing to the people that are genuinely curious about moving here that you think is important that they know before they make that move?
I think the number one thing is you should be coming from a life that's pretty happy to begin with. We had a nice life in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I felt like in many ways it lacks as a city, as the type of city that I want to live in. But at the end of the day, it wasn't horrible. There are certainly worse places to live, and I feel very fortunate for the situation I was in LA. So I think you need to come from a place of wanting to enhance your life. You can't be running away from something, because I go on rants all the time and complain about stuff. I get mad about stuff. I get stressed out. It happens all the time. I didn't think that was going to change by moving to Spain, but at the same time, I'm a bit more laid back. Do I take a different type of joy when I walk out in the street and do things every day? Absolutely.
I think that's something that we honed in on our move. We'd been to Galicia several times. You're never going to know. There's that X factor, right? I think a lot of people try to over prepare for that. How did you know that it was going to be Valencia, or how did you know what you were getting into? Because it sounds like your expectations match reality. Is there a piece of advice you have for that, or is that lived experience?
I think it's just the knowledge that cities, when they're built well, there are certain environments that are conducive to certain types of things.
Yeah.
Like the little micro interactions I have every day in the market, at the coffee shop, on the street with the guy that owns the shop next door. Those things are only possible in particular types of physical environments, which happen, again, both organically, culturally, and because governments and people make the decisions to have those places.
So if someone were moving to a small town of 5,000 or 10,000 people without the reality of what that came with, and they're disappointed with their experience, it's like you can't expect a place not to be what it is.
Exactly. And I think also like moving abroad is a big deal. As much as I love it and as much as has been a great experience. I truly can't imagine like going back to the US and living there. I plan to be here forever. It still has its moments, especially when you're learning the language. It's hard enough to express yourself in your native language, but when you're trying to do it in a different language, and you say it all the time, I want them to know that I'm funny and I have a really good personality. You can't do that in Spanish.
Yeah.
And that can be lonely, might be too strong of a word, but it's like something like that.
Isolating, maybe.
And as much as I love the surroundings here, there's still a slight sense of unfamiliarity, right?
Even when things go well, it's hard.
Yeah, you have to know that you're going to be able to handle that.
Yeah.
If you're the kind of person that complains or gets down or whatever, you're going to complain and get down about things here. And then you're going to complain about the bureaucracy or about your landlord.
And then it can spiral, and then you actually start self-fulfilling a little bit. But
exactly. And then you end up back where you were. Wherever you go, there you are.
You're coming up on 1 year in Spain. Enhorabuena. Not felicidades, eh? Is there anything that you've been pleasantly surprised by, or you've had affirmed for you before you came that you maybe weren't sure about, but you're very rock solid on now?
People often say if you like show up and you give an effort every single day, that it really pays off and people appreciate that. And I think that that's definitely the case in our little micro example in Valencia. We live in a neighborhood that's gentrifying. It's become more expensive, but at the same time, it still is a neighborhood. It still feels like a neighborhood. It still feels very local, still feels very Spanish. 3 times a week, I'm at the same stand in the market to buy chicken, olives, fruits and vegetables. I go to the same coffee shop across the plaza, which is like more of a modern hipster coffee shop.
Yeah.
And the other day, we're buying a piece of lasagna from these people in the market. As we're buying it, this young guy who works as a barista at the hipster coffee shop walks behind the counter and grabs something and leaves. And we said hello. And I'm like, well, he's got to be their son, right? So I went home and I decided to go back and buy a bottle of wine they had there. And I asked the lady, worked up the courage to ask her in Spanish, was the guy from the cafe, is he your son? And her eyes lit up when she said, yes, very proudly, like, he's my son. And it was kind of cool because here's these like older people that have a stand in the market. And then right across the plaza is their 20-something-year-old kid, with his messenger bag and his bicycle working in the coffee shop. So it's just showing up like that every day. People see that and they often ask, not why are you in Valencia? Because there's a lot of Americans and foreigners from across Europe and parts of the world that are here. But it's like, do you plan on staying? And when we talk about, this is the long-term plan, that resonates with them because I think a lot of people don't necessarily plan on staying. They're just kind of coming through.
Right.
It's an adventure. They're testing it out, whatever. But we were pretty dead set on like, okay, we're moving because this is what we want to do. And this is how we want to live out the second part of our lives, which kind of goes back to the other point to reiterate. You got to know what you want, why you want it, and that the place you're going to is going to give it to you. Because if you don't, you're going to set yourself up for a potential world of hurt.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about, your first year. It's been fun to watch the journey. I'm sure you'll do a year-in recap, I'm sure, or something like that.
And I appreciate your videos. Like I said, it's no joke. We felt like, wow, they knew the exact type of town they wanted to be in or city. It was close to everything you guys like to do, and now you're doing it.
Thanks so much, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for spending your day with me and Rocco. I hope you learned a little bit about what makes Spanish cities such an amazing place to live. If you like this style of video where we go to different parts of Spain to hear other people's take on Spanish life, please let us know in the comments. We made a city guide about A Coruña if you're curious about a Galician city, and we have a more in-depth video about how to pick which city you want to live in Spain. Thanks so much for spending your day with us.